President Trump announcing a trade deal between the U.S. and India after months of tensions between both nations.
And that takes effect immediately, with Washington slashing tariffs on Delhi by more than half to 18% from a total 50%. Well, India in kind has lowered its duties and non-tariff barriers on the U.S. to zero.
Mr. Trump says India will now buy oil from the U.S. and potentially Venezuela. He added Mr. Modi committed to buy $500 billion of American goods as well.
And Mr. Modi, in his social media post, did not mention a halt in buying Russian oil. But he did thank Mr. Trump for reducing the tariff to 18%, calling it a wonderful announcement.
Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. with more on this story is Sadanand Dhume. He's Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Sadanand, thank you so much for joining us. I know your primary focus is India and South Asia, but I do have to start by asking you, is this, you think, going to impact ongoing three-way talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S.? I mean, we know this is all about Trump trying to put, pressure on Putin to stop the Ukraine war.
I mean, to the extent that India is cutting back sharply on its oil purchases from Russia, it certainly increases pressure on Russia. As you know, and as your viewers know, the two largest buyers of Russian oil since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 have been China and India. So if you remove India from the equation, it definitely adds an element of financial pressure to the Russians. So there's no doubt that this would be a factor, perhaps perhaps not the most important factor, but certainly a factor in nudging Russia towards the table to talk peace.
Okay, so coming back to this deal, was there a tipping point for Modi, maybe restoring competitiveness vis-a-vis other Asian exporters? I mean, they've been sort of arguing, if you like, for months.
Yeah, I mean, Arnold, you're absolutely right. This has been like a critical issue for India because, as you know, the U.S. is India's largest market, both for goods and for services. And more than anything else, the idea that this 50%, this the massive number hanging over India, when other countries, for example, Vietnam had 20%, Bangladesh had 20%, Indonesia had 19%, other countries in Asia had much lower rates. It raised a question mark over India's competitiveness. It's something that would have been spooking investors. And so for India, getting away from that awful 50% number was very, very important. And I think they'll be breathing a very huge sigh of relief that they've brought it from 50 to 18, which is quite competitive in the current global landscape.
Yeah, and Sadanand, those huge tariffs have really hit Indian exports hard, weighing on the broader economy. We got latest figures showing us export dropped nearly 12% on year in October. Trade deficit also hitting a record. So how much relief do you think this will be for India's economy?
I think it'll be a huge relief, and and it comes with at the same time as another big announcement on the trade front, right? The India-EU FTA. But sticking to the U.S. part of it, you're absolutely right, Sarah. It's hit industries, and more importantly, I think it's hit industries that were labor intensive, right? Garments, footwear, leather, the shrimp industry in Andhra Pradesh, and these are all industries that relied to a large degree on U.S. markets, had a large labor force. And India is a country where people are very sensitive to job losses because there isn't really much social security and jobs aren't particularly easy to come by. So the political pressure was really building up on Mr. Modi. And to his credit, to Mr. Modi's credit and to his team's credit, they held their cool and they seem to have negotiated a pretty good deal.
Right. So you described it as a good deal, Sadanand, but Mr. Trump talked about India buying $500 billion worth of U.S. products. But how realistic is that? And is this more of an economic agreement or a geopolitical move?
Look, the way to look at these numbers on all of these Trump deals is that when you have a deal announcement, it just comes with a lot of big numbers attached to it. We saw that with the South Korean deal. We saw that with the Japanese deal. These are figures that may or may not be realized if we're being absolutely blunt and realistic about it. He likes big numbers. He puts big numbers on his tweets and his Truth Social posts. And that's just the way it is. No one has specified over what period that $500 billion will be attained. Will it be over 5 years? Will it be over a decade? Who knows? It's certainly true that the U.S. will export more to India, which is good for the U.S. I think it's good for the U.S.-India relationship. It's certainly true that India is going to lower its tariffs on many goods from the US. It's certainly true that some of those tariffs are going to go down to zero. All these are positive developments. I wouldn't put too much store into holding down that 500 billion number.
So would that apply to India's agricultural sector as well? Because we know that was an issue. Is it Modi, counting on perhaps this whole process taking a very long time? So he's bought himself a bit of time while reducing tariffs on Indian products as well?
That's a very good question. Now, look, we have to wait and see the fine print. My own sense is that India will probably slash import tariffs on some goods, right? So some fruits, some other goods that are sort of not particularly politically sensitive. I would be very surprised if India has made deep concessions in the most politically sensitive areas, for example, dairy. They may do sort of things that they may do things like, introduce quotas here and there in places that are politically sensitive. But I don't think that, anyone believes that India is going to suddenly dramatically open up its agriculture market. That was never going to happen, and that's not going to happen.
Right. And Sadanand, this tariff deal comes after, ties between the U.S. and India really soured a bit after the U.S. president claimed credit for a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And we saw last year Modi meeting leaders of China and Russia. So what does this tell us now about how India is balancing its ties with China and the U.S.?
The U.S. has been the most important relationship for India for more than 20 years now. And it came as a huge shock to the Indian system to sort of, to have to see this relationship in many ways start to unravel. I think this is going to be reassuring. It's going to allow the Indians to have sort of, more confidence in their relations with the Chinese and with others. There is some kind of partial rapprochement going on with China. There's a partial thaw. I don't think that India and China are ever going to be the best of friends. There are deep structural issues in their relationship. I think India is probably going to continue to normalize to an extent with China, but you're not going to see anything dramatic, for example, like India pivoting away from the US toward Russia and China. I don't think that was anyway going to happen. I think that's even less likely now.
Sadanand, I want to ask you a bit of a broader question with regards to Narendra Modi. What's been happening? Would you call it a bit of a revival for him? His party or his coalition having lost its majority in 2024, but now we've seen a series of deals. And of course, we have this current one and apparently improving poll numbers as well for him.
He's done well since the setback in the national elections, in the sense that he seems to have been his party's been doing quite well in state elections. So he has had this revival. Now he's had these sort of two injections of good news: the India-EU FTA and now the India-US FTA. There was also an FTA with the UK. So some of the economic news is encouraging for him. But, India is a very large, very complex place. And I think there's always enormous pressure on the prime minister. And Modi is now into his third term. And so he also faces an element of natural, what Indian analysts call anti-incumbency, where, after 12 years in office, people are asking, well, what did I get out of this? And so it's a tough act. But you're right that, broadly speaking, the past year has been pretty good for him.
All right, Sadanand, we have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much for talking to us on Asia First this morning. Let's Sadanand Dhume, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C.